The mountains loomed like stone giants, their snow-bitten crowns cutting into the pale dawn sky. Smoke trailed thin and lonely from the crooked chimney of a cabin half buried in pine shadow. Inside, a man stirred awake without the comfort of another voice. His beard was wild, his shoulders bent beneath years of cold, his hands cracked as old leather. He moved with the silence of one who had forgotten conversation. When he descended into town twice a season, the effect was always the same. The saloon's piano stuttered to a halt, and whispers rode the air like tumbleweeds. Children pressed into their mothers' skirts, peeking at him as if he were a specter. Men gave curt nods, respect edged with unease, for his frame spoke of violence survived, and the scar carved down his cheek carried its own grim story. Nobody ever asked for the telling. They called him the Mountain Man, never by his given name. To the town, he was more myth than neighbor, half rumor, half shadow. They said he lived on bear meat and roots, that wolves slunk away from his scent, that once he killed 3 raiders with nothing but a knife. In truth, his days were marked by smaller violences, splitting frozen logs, setting traps in snow fields, scraping hides by the light of a guttering fire. Yet he let the lies stand because they kept people at a distance. Distance was safer. That night, wind rattled the shutters of his cabin, carrying with it the faint strains of laughter from town. He sat alone by the fire, staring into the flame as if it might answer him. The sound of families spilling cheer into the dark hollowed something inside his chest, but he swallowed it down like bitter medicine. He had learned that longing was a weakness, and weakness got a man killed. Still, memory clung to him. Once, long ago, he had reached for love and been met with turned faces, women shrinking back from his rough silence and ruined cheek. He told himself he had no need for softness, no need for company. The mountain was his only companion, its cruel honesty more loyal than any human heart. Outside, coyotes cried, their voices ragged as mourning mothers. The man listened without moving, the sound threading through his bones like an old sorrow. He closed his eyes and let the keening fill the room, neither flinching nor comforting himself. He had become a mountain, enduring, immovable, and alone. Yet beyond those ridges the world was stirring, and fate was not finished with him. Somewhere in the valley below, a woman stood over fresh earth, her heart carved hollow by loss. Neither knew the other yet, but their paths had already begun to bend toward collision, and when they met, the silence he had worn like armor would no longer be enough. Rain slicked the wooden markers of the graveyard, each cross bowed under the weight of weather and grief. She stood among them in her black dress, the hem soaked in mud, her hand pressed to the crude stone where her husband's name had been carved. The boy at her side clung to her skirts, eyes wide and too old for his years. She kept her spine straight, though the weight of loss pressed against her shoulders like a yoke. To falter now would mean ruin. The town offered little more than whispers. Pity came in glances, not in bread or coin. She had debts left behind by a man lowered into the earth, and creditors knew a widow's weakness was as ripe for picking as any harvest. Each morning she stacked wood, drew water, and sewed by lantern light, her fingers raw and blistered. The small plot of land her husband had left seemed to grow more barren with every attempt at planting. Survival felt like a rope fraying strand by strand. On the street, she passed the Mountain Man once. He carried a sack of grain slung over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. The crowd parted for him, mothers tugging their children closer, men offering stiff nods. When she stumbled, he caught her arm before the sack tumbled from her grasp. His grip was strong, but what struck her was the care in it, rough hands holding her as though she might shatter. He returned the grain to her arms without a word, eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. The moment was brief, but it lingered. Later, she heard the warnings. "Don't trust him. He's half wild." Another muttered, "He's dangerous. Best keep your distance." She nodded outwardly, but their words echoed hollow. Dangerous men did not pause to steady a widow's steps. Still, she was wary. The frontier did not forgive naivete. At night, she lay awake listening to the boy's shallow breaths beside her. The cabin walls creaked with cold. She thought of the Mountain Man in his cabin higher up the ridge, alone against the storm. Perhaps the townsfolk were right. Perhaps solitude made him savage. Yet something in his silence had not felt cruel. It had felt careful. Days stretched thin. She chopped wood until her palms bled, sewed until her eyes blurred. The boy grew thinner and her body burned with fatigue. Pride told her she could endure, but despair whispered otherwise. Each time she crossed the town square, she caught sight of the man retreating toward the mountains, his shadow stretching long in the dying sun. She wondered, against her better judgment, what his silence might be hiding. As she watched him vanish into the ridgeline once more, a pang twisted inside her. Not fear, not suspicion, but something closer to longing. It startled her, for she had buried such feelings with her husband. Still, the thought lingered. Perhaps not all strength came from hardness. Perhaps somewhere in that solitude, there was a gentleness no one had dared to see. Snow fell in thick, muffling sheets, the kind that swallowed sound and made the world seem half-dreamed. Her wagon wheel had splintered against a hidden stone, leaving her stranded on the trail with dusk closing fast. The boy shivered beneath a patched coat, his teeth chattering as the wind cut like knives. She tried to mend the wheel with trembling fingers, but the wood refused to hold. Fear pressed heavy on her chest. The wolves had been howling since noon. From the white blur of the trees, a figure emerged astride a dark horse. He dismounted without hurry, the snow crunching beneath his boots. The mountain man's shadow stretched long across the frozen earth, rifle slung across his back. She braced instinctively, but he only knelt by the wheel, running a calloused hand over the brake as if reading the grain. Without a word, he set to work. The boy's eyes widened as the man drew his hunting knife, but instead of menace, there was precision. He shaved wood, bound splints, hammered them into place with the flat of his palm. Each motion was steady, deliberate, carrying the calm of one who had battled storms harsher than this. When the wheel was braced enough to last the night, he gestured toward the tree line. The wolves had drawn nearer. He built a fire with swift efficiency, sparks catching on pine needles until flames leapt against the dark. The widow held the boy close, uncertain, but the heat thawed the ice in her limbs. He skinned a hare with practiced hands, roasting the meat on a spit. When it was ready, he placed the larger portion before her and the boy, keeping a small strip for himself. His silence spoke louder than any declaration. He gave without demand. Only when the child had eaten did he speak, his voice gravel low from disuse. He told her of a family once his own. Wife, daughter, both taken in a raid years ago. Fire and gunfire had left him with scars carved deeper than flesh. He had retreated into the mountains not from cruelty, but from grief too vast to carry among others. His solitude, she realized, was not armor of pride, but a refuge from a wound that had never healed. She studied him by firelight, the flames painting his scar into softer relief. The boy, drowsy with food, leaned against his knee without fear. Awkward at first, he rested a large, rough hand against the child's shoulder, a gesture clumsy yet tender. Something in her heart stirred, an ember she thought buried with her husband. The night deepened, fire crackling steady, wolves retreating into the hills. She reached across the space between them and laid her hand over his. He looked at her as though the gesture carried more weight than any vow. For a moment the world was hushed, the snow outside relentless, yet inside the circle of firelight. Warmth had returned to more than just their hands. The sun bled low across the horizon when the riders came, a dozen shadows kicking dust into the town's single street. Their laughter was coarse, their rifles slung loose, as though law and mercy had no claim here. Doors slammed shut, shutters drawn. The widow clutched her boy to her side, heart hammering as the gang dismounted before the general store. They demanded food, drink, coin, whatever they pleased. Fear thickened the air. This was the same breed of men who had once carved ruin into the mountain man's life. He stepped from the far end of the street, broad and unyielding, the rifle across his arm gleaming in the last light. For a moment silence fell, every eye fixed on him. The bandit leader smirked, scarred lip curling. "Look what crawled down from the hills," he sneered. "Thought you were a ghost." The mountain man said nothing. He planted his boots firm in the dust, his presence filling the space like the weight of stone. Behind him, the widow gripped her boy tighter, torn between dread and a fierce, rising resolve. He turned his head just enough to whisper to her, voice low and steady, "Stay behind me." The standoff cracked like a drawn bowstring. Fingers twitched at holsters. Dust swirled in the tense stillness. Then the street erupted in thunder. Muzzles flared, smoke billowed, bullets split the air. The mountain man moved with grim certainty, firing with precision born not of rage but of necessity. He dropped one, then another, though shots tore his coat and grazed his flesh. Each strike he absorbed seemed to make him more immovable, as if the mountain itself stood in his place. A bandit lunged toward the widow, seizing the boy. Her cry split the chaos, sharp as a knife. Without hesitation, she grabbed the kitchen blade hidden in her skirts, slashing across the attacker's arm. He howled, releasing the child, just as the mountain man's rifle thundered one last time. The body fell hard into the dirt. When the smoke cleared, the street was littered with silence. Horses stamped nervously, the bandits who still breathed crawling away into the dusk. The mountain man staggered, blood seeping from his side, but his eyes sought hers first, not the wound. She was already at his side, pressing cloth to his injury, tears streaking down a soot-smeared face. Around them, townsfolk peeked from doorways, stunned. The man they had feared had stood as their shield. He swayed, but did not fall, his hand finding hers with surprising gentleness. The widow lifted her chin, meeting the gazes of those watching. Her voice rang clear despite the tremor in it. "He is no monster. He is the reason we still stand." At dawn, the light struck gold across the peaks. The boy reached for the mountain man's hand, and the widow did not let go of the other. For the first time in years, he allowed the warmth of their touch to settle into him, no longer a ghost among men, but a man who had found his place. The mountain had given back its heart.